Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Saturday Nightmares live from New York, our live stream, 12 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I hope to see you all there. We're also 2 days away from total solar eclipse. I'm looking forward to going up to where Tom Mezek disappeared on that day, spending the day there, making a video or a few for you while I'm up there. But that's not why we're here now. Right now we're here for some very terrifying encounters, but before we get into those, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below, the merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I've taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into today's upload, shall we? Today's first experience. This may seem unbelievable to some people, but it is 100% true. It is burned into my memory and I will never forget it, even the smallest details. I present it to you exactly as it happened to me. I grew up in the high deserts and mountains of southeast Idaho. Most of my life has been spent outdoors, whether I was on the back of a horse pushing cattle for local ranchers or hunting elk, or on foot hunting rabbit and deer through the sagebrush. I was given my first .22 rifle at the age of 9 years old and spent every minute I could out in the lava flows hunting rabbit, rock chucks, and sage hens. I remember several times that my mom and dad would drop me and my best friend off somewhere along the lavas and pick us up at the same spot 3 or 4 days later, after many miles of exploring and living off the land. All we would take is some water, shells, and a knife. When I got older, I had my own vehicles. My trips got longer and further into the desert. As I write this out, I can still smell the sagebrush and feel the desert sun on my face. Suffice to say, I love that Idaho desert more than any place on earth. I feel more comfortable out in the desert, 30 miles from the closest person, than I do in my own living room. During the summer of 2001, I was south and slightly east of Big Southern Butte. I had spent a couple of days looking for arrowheads. Everything had been pretty normal. I walked for miles, found a few arrowheads, saw a few coyotes and deer. Pretty normal. At this time in my life, I had always had my dog with me. He was a huge Chesapeake retriever that weighed over 100 pounds. He was very protective of me and my belongings. He was meaner than crap to anyone who acted suspicious or threatening. His surly demeanor towards anyone who messed with me or my stuff earned him the name Cain with my family and friends. And the name stuck. Cain loved to go anywhere I went. He loved to go out to the desert and run around, never getting too far away from me. I always felt very secure with him around because he had proved time and time again that he was aware of every living thing that approached us out in the desert. And if that thing was dangerous, whether human or animal, he had no qualms about tearing right into the middle of them. In fact, he enjoyed it. Anyway, we made it back to the pickup truck an hour or so before it got dark. I gathered up some juniper branches and some sagebrush to make a fire. I cooked up some dinner for my dog and we settled into the hammock for the night. There was nothing better than sleeping in a hammock while outdoors. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of trees in the desert, so I'd just find a juniper or a fence post, park my pickup close to it, tie one end of the hammock to the truck, and the other end to the fence post or the tree. I spent many comfortable nights rigged up like this. This night was no different. I climbed into the hammock and was soon asleep. A couple of hours later, I was awoken by raindrops. It had started raining pretty hard, and I was getting pretty wet. I quickly threw all of the gear into my hammock, untied the end from the fence post, rolled it up with everything inside, and tossed it into the back of my pickup with a tarp over it to keep it dry. With all of my gear safely stowed, Kane and I crawled into the cab of the truck and settled in for a dry, if cramped, rest of the night. Around 3 in the morning, a strange sound woke me up. I was reclined back as best as I could in the driver's seat, and Kane was sitting up alert on the passenger side. He was growling very softly, and the hair on his shoulders and neck were standing straight up, a very menacing and intimidating sight. I'm glad he was on my side. He was looking over my shoulder out of the driver's side window. It was his quiet growling that woke me up. I didn't move, but just opened my eyes and looked around by moving my eyes in their sockets. It had stopped raining, and the clouds had gone away. The sky was now clear, with a bright, almost full moon overhead. It was bright enough that I could see Kane very clearly. I wondered what he was focusing all of his attention on, and lifted my hand up in front of his nose. I don't know why I did that, but that's what I did. He never even looked at me, but moved his head to the side so he could continue to watch whatever was out my driver's side window, continuing his quiet, threatening growl. I had never seen Kane so focused on anything the way he was now. It sent a shot of adrenaline through me, and I was immediately wide awake. It gave me the goosebumps, and the hair stood on my arms and neck. I was scared to turn my head and look out my window. I wasn't sure that I wanted to see what was outside. I summoned the courage and slowly turned my head to the left to look out of my window. Maybe 50 yards away, slightly behind the truck and slowly working its way closer towards me, was a large dark figure. In the bright moonlight, I could see that this thing was covered in long, coarse fur. It was walking on 2 legs and moving like a man, but differently. Its arms seemed longer, and it kind of had a swaying motion as it walked. The moon shone through the fur around the outside of its body, and the dark, solid shape underneath was visible. It was moving in slow steps toward the pickup. Every few steps it would stop, crouch down, and wait a few seconds before moving ahead. A couple more steps, exactly as my dad had taught me to do while stalking elk or deer. I have no idea if this creature meant to do me harm, but seeing it move exactly as I did when putting the stalk on a deer, with me as the target of its attention, did not make me feel very warm and fuzzy inside. My mind was on overdrive. Imagine my reality of what exists and doesn't exist in this world was suddenly and without much fanfare turned upside down. At the same time, for the first time in my life, it would happen many more times in the near future in a crappy place called Iraq. Genetically inherited, but deeply buried. Alarm bells were screaming inside of my head. My subconscious recognized the danger and demanded that I do something, while at the same time dumping bucket loads of adrenaline into my system. My thoughts jumped immediately to my pistol, and in the same instant I remembered that it was rolled up in my hammock in the back of my pickup under a tarp. Useless. Not that my pistol would have done any good. As this thing got closer, I could see that it was big, probably 7 or 8 feet tall, and definitely solid. It moved like an animal that is very heavily built, but is quick and fast at the same time, like a tiger maybe. Kane had gone from sitting to standing on the seat. His hair was standing straight up, and his quiet growl had turned into a savage snarl. What a dog. Here is this monster outside of my truck, and my dog is ready for me to open the door and turn him loose. My mind quickly switched from fight mode to flight mode. My keys were in the ignition. Without taking my eyes off of this thing, I reached up and started my truck. The creature was less than 30 yards away now. When I heard the engine start, it crouched down lower to the ground than it had crouched before. The top of its head was just above the level of a patch of sagebrush that happened to be between him and I. My truck was nosed up to a lava rock wall. The only trail out was to my right and behind. There were large lava rocks scattered on the ground, so I had to make an over 180-degree turn while backing up to be lined up with the road. I threw the truck in reverse and floored it by turning on my lights at the same time. As I swung through the turn, my high beam swung right across this creature. It had put its head down, probably to protect it from the glare, and all I saw was the top of its head. I noticed a mass of coarse, dark gray fur before its shape was swallowed by the darkness. I drove down the 2-track desert road way faster than I normally would have. My truck was bouncing all over the rocks and plowing over sagebrush when the curves were too sharp to take at that speed. Kane and I were bouncing all over the inside. I drove that way for several miles, continuously looking behind me until I calmed down enough to slow down. I drove out to the main road and stopped to mentally go over what I had just seen, but stopping out there in the dark was way too much. I ended up cutting my trip short and just went home. Tonight's second encounter. Hello everyone, my name is Edward, and I have a possible unexplained experience that I would like to share with everyone. The following events occurred in Carthus Township, Clearfield County, Pennsylvania. It was the fall of 2001. I would have been 9 at the time. We lived down the street from a Benton's Market. I can't remember the street's name, of course, it was so long ago. But we lived before a bend that led down to a headquarters of a company that had big rig trucks parked there. My father worked on the road for a construction company, so at the time it was just my mom and I. My mom worked at the Permagrain product factory in town. This had to have been a weekend or a school holiday break because we were both home at the time. I remember we used to hear bobcat screams in the woods behind our house all the time. The local wildlife was very diverse and is something I would no longer be used to, as I live in Pittsburgh now. Anyway, there was a wooded area close by, if not everywhere. We even had witnessed 2 bear in our time staying there. But I'll never forget the night our dog Lucky went completely ballistic barking at something outside on or near our front porch. I remember looking out of the window while my mom was asleep and seeing what I at first thought was someone else's dog or a coyote. I'll never forget what I saw, and I never would have contacted anyone about it until recently when I read some reports about a Dogman. I really don't know how to explain it. I didn't see its eyes, but I did see an easily 6 to 7 foot canine. It was only visible for a few seconds, but it was clear as day. This thing was something that stuck into my mind and still does to this day. My mom had woken up and gotten off the couch to look at me, and she also saw it. We both still swear to this day what we saw. Its spur was definitely a lot different, and very mangy looking compared to any other wildlife in the area. My mom and I believed that it was attracted to the cat food we would leave out for the stray cats in the neighborhood. It actually bounded off after a few seconds. It wasn't upright at all, but it stayed on all fours. It looked taller than an NBA player and moved in a different manner than anything I had ever seen before. It had me visibly shaking, and I remember being stunned. My mom called my dad and woke him up and talked to him for a couple hours. Neither one of us wanted to go back to bed after that. I remember it turned into the first time my mom and I had stayed up and told stories until 3 in the morning. I remember my mom explicitly telling my dad that it was unlike anything she had ever seen before. And her only friend in town took her claims as skeptical as first until I was there to confirm what she had seen. I don't know, this experience always had me wondering way later into my adult years as to what this thing was, and if there were more of them. I just found it interesting that there were other sightings like this in the Clearfield area, and I figured I'd share this experience. Thanks so much, and have a wonderful day, Edward. Today's third experience. It's been many years since this happened to me, and I had originally thought a mountain lion was the cause of it, but now I'm not so sure about the mountain lion. In the early 90s, my best friend and I went camping. It was the weekend before Memorial Day, and we were camping at a small campground off the road between Lake Castic and Lake Hughes in Southern California. The first night was so annoying due to all the gangbangers from LA showing up and making noise all night that we packed up and left on Saturday morning. I had heard about a place called Sawmill Mountain from one of my coworkers, and it was close by, so we headed up there. Sawmill Mountain is off the road between Lake Hughes and Gorman, and to get there you need to travel several miles from the turnoff, unimproved dirt roads to a campground. When we got there, it was midday on Saturday, and we were the only people in the campground. The elevation is maybe 5,000 feet, and it was nice and cool up there with a nice view of the valley down below. It was a great campsite. We pitched our tents and set up camp, then ate some lunch and sat down to relax in the shade. My buddy went inside of his tent and took a nap, and I went to my tent and did the same. After a short nap, we decided to do a little exploring. About 25 yards from our campsite was a trail, and I walked on it for about 150. Off to the side of the trail, along the tree line, I heard something moving and looked in the direction. I thought I caught a glimpse of something light-colored, but it stopped moving. I was still in condition white and didn't think anything was wrong, so I kept walking for a few more yards. I was noticing that the wild flowers were blooming everywhere, enjoying the views, when all of a sudden I began to think of the movie Predator, where that monster could see people, but they couldn't see it. Then I noticed that everything had gone absolutely quiet. No insects, no birds chirping, nothing. I did a 360-degree turn and didn't see anything. I guess maybe the sudden silence had triggered some primordial fight-or-flight response in me that made me think of that movie. Anyway, I was armed at the time with a Smith & Wesson 10mm, and I made sure that I had my hand on it. The gun gave me absolutely no comfort whatsoever. The feeling of dread and despair was so immense that I felt panic. I felt frozen in place for a few minutes. Then that little voice in the back of my head kicked in and said, "Get out now." I didn't run because all I could think about was a mountain lion, and running would make it chase me. I couldn't see what it was watching or stalking me, and you couldn't shoot what you can't see. I started calling out to my buddy as loud as I could and walked quickly back to camp. Even after I got back there, I still felt pretty freaked out. My buddy was there drinking a beer, and I told him what just happened. "While you were napping in your tent, I did the same thing," he said. "I felt the same way you did. I've never felt a feeling of dread like that before, and haven't since. It was so powerful, it was crippling." The rest of the weekend was uneventful. Some a-hole in a Subaru Brat came up and drove around the campground like he was in the Baja 500 around sundown, but nothing else happened. It was a great place to camp, but neither of us went anywhere alone. We'd been back several more times for campouts with larger groups of friends, and nothing odd has happened. Then one campout with the same buddy a couple years later, something did happen. Once again, we're the only two up there. I think we had played hooky from work to go up midweek. Anyway, we had a campfire going and had just polished off a couple of thick ribeyes. I believe it was summertime. I was telling my buddy what a big wall of flame a 10mm would produce, and he said, "Let's see." So I shot off the mag. As I predicted, lots of flame and noise. I holstered the gun and sat down by the fire. "You remember that creepy feeling when we first discovered this place?" my buddy says to me. I said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "It's back." I didn't pick up on this at that time, but he did. We both had our guns out and flashlights in our hands, and my buddy thought whatever was causing it was watching us from beyond the camp. We walked toward it, shining our lights up in the trees, thinking it was a cougar or bobcat, but there was nothing. About 10 yards from camp, all of a sudden, something growled at us. I won't repeat what my buddy said, but we hightailed it back to camp as quickly as we could. When we got there, we lit every lantern we had, threw a bunch of termite-eaten pine wood into the fire to get things as bright as we could. That night was a tough one to sleep through, but nothing bothered us after that. Fast forward to a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to my buddy by text message about what we had been calling the ghost of Sawmill Mountain, and I had said I thought it was a mountain lion. What he said totally blew my mind. He's pretty sure it was a Sasquatch or a Dogman that day, many years ago. He pointed me to a bunch of cryptid websites, and I did some reading. I have to say I'm starting to agree with him. From everything that I've read, they stay close enough to us that they can keep an eye on us. And unlike that hippie view that they are gentle guardians of the forest, they're actually an apex predator. I think on that day I was either on the menu or had made the thing by scaring off what it was after. I also think that growl a couple years later was a gentle reminder to stop making so much racket in its territory and stay in our campsite. Also, I found out that the Pacific Crest Trail that runs from Mexico to Canada through Cali, Oregon, and Washington cuts right through Sawmill Mountain. And the websites that track cryptid sightings have had a few in that general area. I live in Arizona now, but I'd like to go back there someday and look for some evidence. Tonight's fourth experience. Back in late June of 2021, my sister and I were driving from Utah into Arizona as I was moving to Phoenix. I don't remember the exact forest area, but it was right as we started the descent from the mountains in northern Arizona. My sister and I were talking as she was driving. We enter into a clearing in the trees. As we came to this clearing, there was a very large rock on the right side of the road that caught my eye. Upon seeing the rock, I saw a movement to the left of it. There was a very large, distinct canine-shaped figure in the clearing next to the rock. As I stared, trying to make out what it was, we had both gone silent mid-sentence. I clearly saw eyeshine that was almost a reddish-orange in color. Whatever it was locked in a stare with me and tracked the vehicle with its eyes. My blood had run cold, and I felt a feeling of utter helplessness sink over me. The feeling was accompanied by the thought that whatever this thing was could do serious harm to us, and I'd have no way of stopping it. The creature only stood and stared at us as we passed. When the initial shock wore off a couple minutes later, I quickly asked my sister if she had seen anything. Her voice was shaky as she confirmed exactly what I had seen, a very large canine-like creature staring directly at us as we passed through that clearing. I have seen black bears up close and personal within 20 yards, and whatever this thing was clearly was not a black bear. It was quite a bit larger, with more of a slender build and a very dog-like head with a snout. My sister was very shaken by this experience and had tears in her eyes, due to the fear she was feeling. She continued driving as we both felt completely unsafe to stop or even have a window down. She doesn't like to talk about it to this day. I believe what we saw to be consistent to other reports that I have seen in this area. I will never go into those woods alone, and I hope what we saw was an optical illusion or a misidentified animal. But I can't shake that feeling that it wasn't, and still see very clearly the figure in my mind whenever I think about it, and am overcome with chills and begin to shake all over. Tonight's fifth experience. We were living in a little town in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains in Lake City, Tennessee. It's now called Rocky Top, about 40 miles north of Knoxville. Many of us teens used to climb up this huge house-sized boulder visible from I-75 when the leaves are off the trees and hang out, hence the term, Party Rock. Late one summer during school break, me and my sister decided to go climb. A lot of different times back then, no phones, we'd be out from sunup until dark, walk for miles. My mom knew I'd keep us safe as much as my 14-year-old could. Well, we walked the tracks for a mile or two and hit the trail at the base of the mountain. After a couple of hours walking, we came to a fork in the trail, and even though I've been there before with my older brothers, I took the wrong turn. After walking for probably a good half an hour or so in a 90-degree heat, the trail just abruptly ends, nothing but thick brush, and a 40-degree incline of woods lie ahead. I told my sister that I made a mistake and we could easily walk all the way back or just head straight up from here. I knew enough that if we just kept climbing up, looking at the daylight in the trees above, we would eventually hit the ridge line to the other trails, and I could easily find our way back to Party Rock. So we started trudging forward, grabbing saplings to pull ourselves up along the way. We stopped often to catch our breath, get our bearings, drink from the canteen, and would often look down, hoping to finally get a great view of our little town. But the woods were too thick at that point. As we're slipping on the old leaves and gasping for air, we reached a few feet of level ground in order to catch our breath. I'm not sure who first saw it, but as soon as I did, I looked over at my sister, and her mouth was already agape. I've gone over our account many times before, and I'm still not sure how we managed just to stumble upon this. I don't know how it could have not heard us, but maybe the birds were chirping up there, or maybe it had just got there. I don't know. But I researched countless encounters over the decades, and I truly believe ours had got to be one of the best ever. And here's why: most encounters are brief, fleeting glimpses of one crossing the road or peeking at them, possibly throwing stones, etc. This Bigfoot was completely unaware of our presence. My sister immediately whispered, "Bigfoot," but me, being the big brother, tried to calm her fears and not show mine by saying, "It's probably just a hiker enjoying the view." We both turned around and thought, what view? Now we're in the middle of nowhere, completely off any semblance of a trail in 90-degree heat. No way was that a person in any suit. They could have sat there for 100 years and never ran into another person. As my mind is racing, all I can do is stare. I've grown up hunting, trapping, camping. I was proficient in biology and art, so I knew what animals are supposed to be in certain areas and what they look like and how to draw them. This was no bear, mountain lion, bobcat, or even a feral human being. All were ludicrous answers people would give. As we stared at it, I noticed it had no clothing. It was completely covered in long reddish/orange-brown hair, except for around its base. It was squatting, something bears cannot do. And as it looked to its left, my blood ran cold. I could clearly see that this was no human. It had more of an ape-like face and an unmistakable crown on its head, like a big silverback gorilla. It was reaching to its left to a bush and pulling leaves/branches off and bringing them to its mouth and eating them. I couldn't see if there were any berries on them or not, but it was clearly eating the leaves and all. We were so close, we could hear the branches break and the sound of the bushes bouncing back. Periodically, it would act like it was coming up and out of its squat, a little bit halfway standing, as leaned side to side, craning its neck, trying to look down through the trees towards us. That was terrifying. Maybe he caught an occasional scent of us, wafting up, or just sensed us, I don't know. My sister kept wanting to run, and I was literally too scared to run. I just wanted to close my eyes and wake up home after what seemed like an eternity. But was probably a good 10 or 15 minutes. I whispered, "We run on the count of 3. I barely breathed. 1, 2, 3. We spun around and started sprinting straight down that wooded mountain. I'll never forget the sound. We went from dead silent to what sounded like a herd of elephant running through a bowl of potato chips. Looking back years later, I'm sure we scared the crap out of it, but not as bad as it did us. As soon as our feet hit dry leaves and twigs, if there was ever any doubt, it let out the loudest, longest, most god-awful roar that lasted 5 seconds or more. It was terrifying. I literally did a front flip, my feet trying to run faster than my capabilities, plus the angle we were running down was steep. We were so afraid it was going to head us off or snatch us in the dried up creek bed below. We ran straight through the walls of thickets and thorns, sliding over 15 feet drop-offs, etc. We're literally a bloody mess when we finally got home. My sister had lost my mom's watch and a shoe. I lost my machete and a few other things. As soon as we realized we were safe, shock set in. My sister started to throw up and I started to cry. We were both white as ghosts. My older brothers believed us, got their guns, and went back up there. Sadly, I refused to go back into those woods for many years after this incident. My brothers said it was very easy to track us since it looked like a freight train had rolled down the mountain, breaking trees and brush. They found her shoe and watch. They also asked why did we run through all those briars when there was a path right around them. We didn't take the time to look for an easier path. We ran straight down in order to get out of there. Tonight's final encounter. I used to be really close to the Cherokee National Forest when I was in my mid-20s, and one day I was driving through it from the next town over. It was dark and the roads were really curvy, but I wanted to get back home ASAP, so I was going a little fast. My boyfriend was in the passenger seat, and all of a sudden we came up to two dogs standing in the middle of the dark road. These dogs were definitely totally different breeds. I think one was a greyhound or something, and one was a German shepherd. They were on either side of the road, both facing each other. One was white, one was black. At first I felt compelled to stop and shoo them off of the road, but my boyfriend advised me against it. I came to a complete stop and beeped the horn. They didn't move, so I proceeded to drive slowly around them, almost going off the road. At first, it would seem as though they were blinded by the headlights, but as we passed them, I noticed they were looking right at me through my driver's side window. Fast forward a year later, I was telling this story to a friend as we were walking home from work. In the midst of telling him, I suddenly had an epiphany. This same thing occurred to me when I was 9 or 10 years old. I recalled a memory of visiting my grandmother in the rural part of North Carolina. One stoplight and fields on either side. You get the picture. We're sitting outside of her house. It's pitch dark outside, with only the house light illuminating to the end of the driveway. All of a sudden, two dogs came out of the field very slowly. One was a bulldog, and one was almost a wolf dog-looking thing, one white, one black. They crept up to the edge of the concrete, staring intently. I wanted to go and pet them, but my grandmother said no and told me to stay very still. They left after a few moments. This year I worked in another part of rural North Carolina. It had gotten very foggy around January. As I was pulling out of the parking lot, I spied from a long way down the road a black dog. At first I thought nothing of it, but then I looked across the street. A white dog was coming toward the road on the opposite side. Needless to say, I went in the opposite direction as fast as I could. That was 4 months ago. I hope someone has a clue on what I saw. Alright, folks, some very terrifying experiences. I am looking forward to tonight's live stream. I hope to see you all there. Anyway, with that being said, guys, thank you for supporting this channel. Your support is what makes this channel continue to grow and go, and honestly, what makes it a place where people want and can share their experiences, theories, and ideas without judgment and ridicule. Just the respect that they deserve, and you as well. And that's a community that you guys have created in the comment section. Thank you so much. Please, everyone, stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and they are dangerous. Share this information with the people you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.